Hello and welcome back to any subscribers or anyone who's seen any of my videos before, and a warm welcome to any new viewers. Now it's been quite a while since I've put any videos up, and a few things have kind of changed, moved on, developed. One thing I haven't really got any order for this. I'm just gonna kind of go through it randomly. So one of the things I've been trying to do in the time off is trying to get ready to go on VATSIM, and I have done a couple of flights on VATSIM now, and I'd like to use VATSIM for videos in future. Tonight there's not really any ATC covering Scotland where I was planning to fly, and also I'm trying to use time during the day, whereas on VATSIM you're better off using real world time. So I'm not actually going to do this flight on VATSIM, but future flights I'm hoping to do. Secondly, with aircraft, I still have the SAB, which I've used for a few of the videos, although I'm kind of waiting for the 1.5.2 update to the SAB to fix the autopilot bank angle and a couple of engine things. I mean, it's perfectly flyable as it is, but it'd be nice to have those things fixed. The other thing is I really like King Airs. Now I've flown the King Air C90 that comes with X-Plane, and it's nice, but I really like the B200 King Air. So I have bought the B200 King Air from Carenado, and that's what you can see in front of us at Inverness Airport here. Part of the reasons, I mean, I just like the King Air. I think it's a nice design. It's proper PT6 turboprop engines. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's fast, it's maneuverable, it's very versatile. King Airs are used for lots of things. They're used for corporate flights, they're used for executive transport, they're used for parachute jumping, and they're used as air ambulances. Which brings me to another reason why I really like this King Air, is that Gamma Aviation used them in Scotland for Scottish air ambulance support. And if we just have a look here, I mean, how superb does it look in that yellow livery? I mean, unfortunately I don't have the yellow livery, but I think it's absolutely fantastic, and it's an example of one of the Gamma ambulance planes. So yeah, I'm flying the B200 King Air. The plan today is to fly from Inverness over here to Stornoway. Now it's quite a short flight. It's direct routing on Airway Yankee 906. The interesting thing is the approach to Stornoway. Stornoway Airport. So Stornoway is a bit interesting in that the nearest VOR DME, which is a radio transmitter where you can tune to a particular radial or bearing and get your distance and approach on whatever bearing you like, is over here, but the airport's over here. So there's a bit of a gap between the two. The airport itself doesn't have ILS, but it does have locator and a DME equipment, which means effectively it has a narrow beam which you can tune into, and it will tell you when you're on centerline, but it won't give you glide slope, and it will also give you the distance away from the runway. We'll look at the approach a bit more in a minute. First thing I guess we need to do really is find out what the weather is, so we know which runway we're going to be landing on. And I guess we also need to know which runway we're going to be taking off in Inverness. Another thing I've been using a lot more is SimBrief. So I've been using SimBrief to create flight plans. So although this hardly needs a flight plan, the other advantage of SimBrief is that you can create a flight plan using waypoints and airways. You can save the flight plan and then import it into the GPS in X-Plane, and it saves a lot of twiddling around with knobs on the Garmin GPS. So I'm going to create a new flight plan. So I'm logged into SimBrief, create a new flight plan. I'm going to pretend to be a Gamma Aviation flight. As you can see, I've used this before. We're going to be departing from Inverness, which is not that, which is that. Let's just double check. So to double check, I'm just going to switch to to a little nav map for a second. If you've not used little nav map, it's a great tool to go along with your flight simulator. So yeah, Inverness, code there for Inverness EGPE and Stornoway EGPO. So arrival is EGPO, and the alternate, we're just going to go back to Inverness if we can't land, because it's not that far. I've saved my airplane, but SimBrief knows all about the B200 King Air, so you can select it from the list of airframes, and it'll automatically work out, you know, the cruising altitudes, climb profiles, cruising speeds, fuel, and so on. Yeah, in fact, here's my route, which is great. So suggested route in this case is exactly the one we want. If we just have a look on Navigraph, so the route is from Inverness to Garva, follow Y906 to STN. Exactly what we want. There's only really one other waypoint in between Ullapool, so hopefully that'll get added, as you'll see when we save the flight plan and import it. Okay, so I'm happy with that route. I mean, I guess we could pick the one that's just Garva STN. No, that's right, because that will miss out the rest of the waypoints. So this is another one, but this is the one to use. So let's generate a flight plan. So this generates the kind of briefing output that you would get in a proper flight plan. It'll also tell you how much fuel, this block fuel, that you need, including like reserves, etc., and enough fuel to get back to your alternate airport. You get estimates of times. You get step-by-step plan, so each waypoint, starting at Inverness, then the first waypoint, and top of climb, and other waypoints, and top of descent. You get useful information. Minimum en route altitude is minimum safe altitude you can fly. This is the flight level it suggests you go to. So flight level 100, so we can set out autopilot altitude to flight level 100. I think I always miss the ATIS in this. Does the ATIS come after that bit or before? Yeah, here we go. So Inverness, that's the wind, 210. So I suspect it's probably picked runway. They picked a suitable runway. I can't remember where the runway is. Here we go. That's the alternate. Somewhere in here is the runway to use for takeoff. Maybe that is it. Oh, here we go. Routing, yeah. This is the route. So runway 23 at Inverness and runway 36 at Stornoway. Okay, great. That's all we need to know. Okay, so without further ado, I mean, the other things you get in here, you get your notices of any kind of restrictions or temporary danger areas, etc., 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 which I generally just skim over. Also useful is your wind at different heights. This is at flight level 50 to 5,000 feet. This is wind at 5,000 feet. And it looks like it's going to be a headwind if I'm reading those things the right way around. And you can get temperature and wind at different heights as well, and a nice profile of the ground above below your route. So most of the high ground is obviously over the Highlands after we take off from Inverness. Then once we're past Ullapool, we're basically out over the sea. Okay, so let's get the flight plan onto the aircraft. Let's get the aircraft started. So I'm going to choose download FMS. I'm going to choose X-Plane 11 format. I'm going to download, save the file. The place to save it is your X-Plane directory, output folder, then FMS plans. So X-Plane 11 output FMS plans, and it will default to the names of the being named after the departure and the arrival airports. Okay, that's the flight plan saved. So just go back to, I'm just going to leave on the screen at the moment this sort of useful stuff. Where was the notice? I've already lost the route. There we go. Okay. Before jumping into the aircraft and loading the flight plan, let's starting the engines as well. That would be useful. Let's just make sure that we close the passenger door and got rid of the cones and chocks. So, startup sequence. So this is the point. So if we would just hide the yoke for a second, if we were on VATSIM, we would turn on the batteries, turn on avionics, tune the radio, contact Scottish Control, and we'd request clearance for our flight to Stornoway, and then we would request startup clearance as well. For now, let's turn off avionics power. We've got batteries on. Let's get number 2 engine started. Let's get both props fully forward. We're going to turn on the right engine ignition and starter, and when the turbine has spun up to about 15% of its maximum, and I'm going to introduce some fuel using the condition lever. So you want to get the turbine spinning first, otherwise the fuel is just going to not combust properly. So here we go. Electric starter now turning the turbine up to about 15%. Introduce some fuel. Hopefully it'll now ignite. You should see the temperature, gas temperature, come up to near the maximum and settle back. Torque should settle back. Turn off the starter. You can put the condition lever fully forward. That's basically just low idle and high idle. You can turn on number 2 generators, the generator for this engine, which will start to charge the battery. Battery charge light is on, because we've taken a fair bit of charge out of the battery just by starting the engine, because turning over the starter uses lots of power. Okay, we can now feather the number 2 engine just to keep the noise down. Of course, I always forget there's 2 things. First of all, we should have properly checked that there was no one going to get their head or arms chopped off near the engine, and that the engine's any ports are on cover and any tie downs have been removed. And also we should have turned the beacon on before starting the engine. Now we've got that one going, we'll turn beacon and nav lights on. Okay, we'll get the other engine started as well. So the important thing here is we need to turn off the number 2 generator before we try and start the left engine, otherwise we could overload the generator or the fuses or trips or whatever. We need to start just on battery, at least until we've got the turbine spinning. Once it's up and spinning, that's the bulk of the power from the battery used, so then we can turn the generator back on. We've got no risk of blowing any fuses or overloading it. So generator off, left starter on, watch for N1 getting up to about 15%. We can now put generator 2 back on, and we can introduce fuel, which is not that lever, for engine number 1, which should see a temperature rise, we should see fuel flow, we should see engine torque. We got all those good things. You can turn the starter off and put condition lever fully forward, and we can have generator number 1 online as well. Now you should see DC load on both generators. As our inverter is on, we should also see AC being produced. So great, we've got all the power we need now. It's just going to feather number 1 for now. Okay. Now the engines are started, you can just make sure a few other things are set. So auto feather can come on, we've already done the nav and the strobe, and we can turn bleeds back on for air for the cabin. Generators are already on, inverter is on. Again on VATSIM we'd have been assigned a squawk code. Now I'm using I mean, I'll come to VATSIM a bit more when I actually use it, but I'm using Swift Pilot Client, and using the Swift Pilot Client you can connect to VATSIM and you can control the radios and the transponder. For this flight, if it's IFR without an assigned squawk, I think it's 2200. So if we do that, we haven't got it powered on, so interestingly enough it's not going to do anything. So let's turn on. It's because we haven't got any avionics power. It would help if we had avionics master turned on. Now you can see we've got sort of 2200 and we're on standby. We can go to mode C when we actually get to the runway. Good. And also we can change our radio frequencies here as well. That's enough of Swift for now because I'm not planning on using it for this flight. Okay, let's get our flight plan loaded. This plane comes equipped, fortunately or unfortunately, with two Garmin 430s, which are the really basic Garmin, so you don't get much of a display. It'd be nice if one of these was a 530, but it isn't. You do kind of get the route on this Avidyne thing as well, but not particularly lots of data on there. So, okay, flight plan. We've saved the flight plan from SimBrief. We can load it. If we didn't load the flight plan, then we'd have to come here, we'd have to get the cursor, we'd have to start selecting waypoints one at a time, and it's exceptionally tedious. So let's not do that. Let's go to flight plan, and let's quickly inner knob once. No, that's not right. Let's not do that either. Let's get rid of the cursor, then we'll click it to move it along. We want to get to this option square here. This is our flight plan catalogue. We want the cursor back. We scroll to the one we just generated, which is Inverness to, which is EGPE to EGPO. I think that's it. Let's choose this, and we're just to check. We'll have a look at the flight plan. So Inverness, Garva, Ullapool, Stornoway. Yep, that's our flight plan. If you hold down the clear button, it goes back to the active navigation screen, which will show you the next waypoint. Now, it'd be nice to get a visual map as well, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on here to open up the second 430. I'm going to go to flight plan mode, but this time I'm going to cross-fill flight plan from the first one. Now I'm going to go back to the default navigation display. Now I'm going to go one screen along, which gives us our map. I find this quite useful, so you can have the detailed information about the next waypoint, you know, the distance to it, the direct track, bearing, and so on in here, and you can also have a visual display on this one. We don't have any SIDs or anything here to follow. We're just going to depart Inverness and head straight, make it, you know, we'll get to 500 feet and then we'll make a right turn to get to the first waypoint. We do need to set our desired altitude for the autopilot though, and if we go back to SimBrief, well, I won't actually show you, but SimBrief told us we were going to be flying at flight level 100, so let's set 10,000 feet on there. QNH at the moment is 1032, so we'll just set that. We are taking off according to SimBrief runway 23, so set our heading bug to 230 degrees for runway heading. We want the CDI, the course indicator, to be on GPS mode, not nav radio mode for now, so that the autopilot nav will follow the GPS. At least initially. We will switch to using radio beacon later, but let's do GPS for now. And we will get the autopilot arm. Now on the Carenado King Air, you can use the autopilot in its extremely inconvenient spot down here, or you can bring it up here on screen. For now, let's do down here. So I'm going to pre-select nav mode, altitude select, and I'm going to select a vertical speed plus 1500 as a reasonable climb speed. So when we arm the autopilot after takeoff, it's pretty much hopefully going to be ready to go where we want it to go. We'll check our trim. is the trim's a bit off, isn't it? Thought that should be normally around about here for takeoff. Okay, I think we're ready to taxi, and this is where again on VATSIM we would call for the taxi clearance. I'm going to put the props fully forward now. Fuel, we haven't really done fuel, have we? Block fuel was 500 in the sim brief plan, so let's just make sure we're okay on fuel. Let's go for 500, that's close enough. Okay. I should also mention that I'm using a new, I used to just capture the screen in X-Plane using the NVIDIA GeForce Experience thing, whatever it's called, but I found that that couldn't record audio from more than one channel, so it meant that if I want to ever record, because I use my headphones for VATSIM audio, so to listen to controllers, and I use my speakers for the actual sound from X-Plane, I couldn't record the aeroplane sounds and the VATSIM controllers using NVIDIA GeForce thing, so instead I'm using something called OBS to do the recording. So I'm also and OBS takes a little bit more managing, because you can select which window you want to show, whether you want to show X-Plane or you want to overlay a browser or a map on top. You have to kind of click things on and off, click sources on and off, so apologies if I get any of this wrong at any point. I'm trying to juggle a few things here. This is a bit of a learning curve for me here. Okay, I am gonna enable head tracking just whilst we taxi. Now, runway 23 at Inverness. Let's just think, yeah, we need to turn, we're on the north parking, so we need to turn right. In fact, it would be useful, I guess it would be useful to get a airport diagram up just so we can see where we're going. So let's go back to Navigraph charts. Let's bring them up so you can see them as well. We'll look for Inverness and get the charts. We'll get the taxi chart just so I can show you where we are and where we are going. So we are at the North Apron here. For some reason this kind of taxi route is kind of shown as not in use, so we have to taxi here, which I actually think is a runway, but anyway, let's assume we've been cleared to taxi via E1 and hold at Foxtrot. So for taxiing we need to turn taxi light on. Do we need to turn anything else on? Probably not. We've got nav beacon lights on. We haven't got the strobe on yet because we all don't. We don't need our transponder on yet. So I think we're good to taxi. Okay, so parking brake off. We've got our condition levers about. Oh no, we haven't. We've got the condition levers way up, so it's about halfway. If we have the condition levers on full, then we'll be kind of taxiing too quickly, and we'd have to keep using the brakes, and we may overheat the brakes. So about halfway gives you a reasonably good taxi speed. I assume we've been cleared to cross E1 and use this runway to taxi to the main runway. As we're on a runway we can speed up a bit. I guess as we're on a runway we should probably have our landing and strobe lights on now. Turn the taxi light off. We'll hold at the end of this runway just to get clearance to enter the main runway. So let's just come to a halt here. Thank you. The other thing I'm just going to do is just double check our initial routing. Let's see if we can get SimBrief back, because it did have a handy map. Apologies, I think I've just taxied along with the browser on top. I shall remove that shortly. What I wanted to do is just check on the map. There we go. So runway heading is 230, so this direction, so we need to take off, follow runway heading, and then it's going to be a right turn to intercept the airway. Okay, let us remove SimBrief. So at this point, with ATC, we would call, well, they would probably call us and tell us we were cleared takeoff, runway 23, and we would check we had our landing lights on, check out our strobe lights on, put our transponder to mode C. You can do that with the pilot client Swift or directly in here. Altitude set, and I think we're good to go. So I am going to remove the brakes, remove the handbrake, and enter the runway and backtrack. And we have props appropriately set. Really like the engine sounds on this Carenado aircraft as well, it's superb. Check the runways are clear, the runway is clear. We'll now backtrack to the end and turn round. You can see our heading bug is facing in the opposite direction, which tells us we're going the right way for the backtrack. The GPS is telling us that it's expecting us to be on the first part of the route, which is from Inverness to Garva. So that's good. It's exactly where it should be telling us to go. That's the first waypoint on the airway. Just slow it down on the brakes now and turn round. Get ourselves lined up, ready for takeoff. Turn head tracking off for now. Try and get the handbrake to work. Right, okay. So we're going to follow the flight director. The flight director is these magenta bars. It will guide us in terms of our pitch angle, pitch up angle, and the turn that we need to make. We're going to get to about 100 knots and rotate after that. We're not using any flaps for this takeoff. And we are good to go. So let's advance the power and get going. Let's remove the brakes. So airspeed's coming up, it's 80 knots. Power's good, engine instruments look good, so it's 100 knots. I'm going to start to rotate. We are up, so I'm going to raise the gear. Flight director is already telling us to turn if you look at the magenta bars, but I'm going to wait till we're about 500 feet before I do that. Just going to bring the prop back to 1900 RPM for climb. Check that we're clear on the right, which we are. I'm now going to start to turn to follow the flight director bars. You can also see on the lower GPS unit that we are turning towards the magenta line, which we want to be following. and we can now start to straighten up. And just trim the aircraft for a second, and we can pretty much let it fly on its own now until it intercepts. Looking at the course indicator here, the course offset bar is off to the right, so we just need to wait for that to come in, and then we're on our desired track, which it should do shortly. So we zoom in on the GPS, you'll see, and we're almost intercepted the track, and there we go, it's coming in, and the flight director in fact should be telling us to turn left now, which it is. Yeah, it's close enough for me. I'm going to engage the yaw damper on the autopilot. Okay, so we should now be on our climb to 10,000 feet, assuming of course the ATC has cleared us to go straight to that level. Okay, so let's make sure we've got full power. We can now do our after takeoff checks. You can turn prop sync on, auto feather can go off. We've already done the props, landing lights can go off. And that's pretty much it. I mean, this aircraft really is actually quite simple to fly. Now then, while we're climbing, let's actually one thing I need to do is just let's get our navigation radio set up, because we're going to need that later, because the approach in Stornoway is fairly complicated, at least it is for me. So let's bring Firefox back up and we go and have a look at the approach. So we're using runway 36, and this is the approach chart. This is the runway here, so we essentially want to be on our final approach. We'll be coming in here to runway 36 and landing. How do we get to that final approach? Well, this is the initial approach fix that we'll use. And why is it this one? Well, this 305 degree arrival point is actually on the airway that we're on. How do we know that? Well, SkyVector is quite good for stuff like this. If you look at SkyVector, we've taken off from Inverness, we're heading towards Garva, so we're kind of on Yankee 906. I'm going to follow that all the way here. The bearing from this thing here is this 115.1 megahertz VHF is a VOR station, so it will tell us our radial, the radial that we're on, and how far away we are. The Y906 is on the 123 degree radial from the VOR. If we add 180 to that, quick way is add 200, take away 20, so that's 303. So the reciprocal of this would be 303 degrees. So essentially matching the 305 degrees. So this is we are going to be coming in this way. So we can use this initial approach fix. Initial approach fix normally would be from the VOR, but if you notice here, it's 17 miles from the localizer transmitter, not 17 miles from the VOR. So we're going to need both receivers. We're going to need both of our nav receivers here, one tuned to the VOR so that we can make sure we're on the right radial, and the other one tuned to the localizer. So the way I'm going to do that, let's turn Firefox off for now on here. So I'm going to tune This is the second. This is nav 2 basically, second nav receiver. It needs to be tuned to the localizer 110.9, which in fact it already is. So that's already done. The first one is tuned to 115.1, which is the VOR. So we have the VOR tuned on the top receiver and the localizer tuned on the bottom receiver. Now, when you're in GPS mode, you don't get any VOR readout, but I'll tell you what else we'll do. We'll sync our heading. It's always good practice to keep your heading synced with the direction that the nav's got you going in, because in case you need to just switch back to heading mode or anything. Also, we're coming to top of climb here. Let's have a look around. I see some mountains. It's pretty hazy though. As we're at top of climb now, we can bring the prop back to cruise RPM, which is between sort of 1800. There are tables that tell you which to use. I tend to just be lazy and kind of put it in the middle of the two. Also, we can increase power a bit, because as we're higher up, the air's thinner. We can develop more torque now. We just have to watch our turbine RPM doesn't go above 100. We should get some decent speed now. I think we did have a headwind, so our ground speed might not be that great. Okay, so we should be in a stable cruise now. Okay, distance-wise, yes. So if we switch this, if we turn off GPS here and switch to the Nav1 radio, what we'll see, we will see the distance to the VOR appear over here, which is great. But we don't actually want the distance to VOR. We want the distance to the localizer. Now, it's impossible with this plane will not let you have nav2, the lower receiver, as the primary info or nav target over here in this display. But what you can do is use this readout over here. So on the right hand side here, this is the DME distance readout. It shows how far you are away from the selected nav receiver, in this case VOR1. So we're 52 miles from the Stornoway VOR. It shows you your, I think this is ground speed, and how long it's going to take you to get there, 13 minutes. But the trick is you can switch this display to show you the distance from the second nav receiver by using the button in the middle. Now at the moment we're not within range of the localizer, because localizers, because they're only really meant for landing, don't have a very big range. Maybe you might get 20 miles out of one. So for now this display is going to read 0 just over here on the right, but when we get close enough, hopefully by here 17 miles away, we should start to see the distance readout. So we're looking for that to say 17. Then we, that's our initial approach fix. We can descend to 1800 feet. We want to be at 1800 feet before that. That's another thing I'll come to in a minute. And when we get to 12 miles from here, we make a left turn onto the arc, 10 arc. Now normally an arc, you would have an arc from, well, it is an arc from a particular radio receiver. And normally it would be a VOR, because when you follow the arc you need to know what radio you're on so you can keep at right angles. In this case we don't get radios from the localizer, so all we can do is try and keep our distance to 10. I think we can probably also use the Stornoway, I've forgotten what they're called, the NDB 431 kHz, so we'll also switch that on. We'll switch our ADF to use that. We've already got it tuned in down here to 431. And then we'll look for that bearing pointed to be at right angles. But anyway, the main thing we'll use is we'll keep the distance over here at 10, and we basically have to just keep the distance until we get to the 100, until we're on the 198 radial from I hope you're keeping up here, from the VOR. Then we can start our turn onto the final approach course. Okay, simples. It's 198. I see. This is, oh yeah, R125. Okay. I guess that'll work. Well, we'll see. I quite like bearings to the VOR, so 305 here makes sense. Then when you think about it, we'll be going 310, 320, 330, etc. So what's 198? What's the reciprocal of 198? Well, we add 200, which would give us 398. Take away 20, 378, so that's 18 degrees. So effectively, if we keep turning our radial until we get to 18 degree, I'm just going to make a note of this radial, that's the time to start to turn in. Now, before we get too carried away looking at the charts, let's get back over here. Oh, we should be on standard, because we're at flight level, now, we should be on standard pressure. So I should have set earlier, because I think transition altitude is probably at 6,000 feet or something, so my mistake there. So let's turn standard pressure. We are, well, we don't know how far we are. Yes, we do. We're not, well, we're running to Ullapool now, and we're nearly there. Oh, okay. This is interesting. We probably need to start descending. We need to be at 2,000 feet by the time we get to about 12 miles away. Let's say 10 miles away from here. We have to drop 8,000 feet. That's 24. Plus the 12, 36. We need to start descending right now because we're 36 miles away. So, without further ado, let's bring this back down. I'm going to take it all the way to 1800 because that's the altitude we actually want to be at. I'm going to go Alt Cell, indicated airspeed, and then I'm going to pull back the throttle so we start to descend. So I told you this was quite a short flight. And it's going to get exceptionally busy once we get near and we try and follow the approach procedure. And of course you didn't see me do any of that because I left the browser in the way. But yeah, so what we're doing now is we are now descending. And I mean the sort of rule of thumb I use is 3 times. So you work out how far you've got to drop. So in this case it was from 10,000 to 2,000. That's 8,000 feet drop. Multiply that by 3 is 24. So it's 24 miles. Plus we've got to allow the 12 because we need to be at that height 12 miles away from where we're going. And anyway. So it tells you start at 36, then the rate of descent you want is 5 times your airspeed, so that's 5 times 220, which is what, 1100. So yeah, we're slightly over that at the moment. That's fine. I tend to find you need to go slightly over it to be sure that you're gonna make it. So what are we looking for now? We're still on the GPS, and really we want to be on the 305 degree. We want to be on this 305 degree radial here. So we need to now tune to the VOR and set the bearing pointer to 305 degrees. So heading, let's go to heading mode on autopilot for now. Let's switch GPS off. Here we go, we now have the Stornoway, distance from the Stornoway VOR, and we're going to set a bearing of 305 degrees, and we're going to switch. But actually, let's first of all use heading just to get ourselves lined up. Because I find that if we just immediately switch to nav now, the plane will kind of severely bank left, and we don't want to upset anyone's drinks in the back. So let's kind of get there gradually, and then we'll switch to nav mode. Also, we've got to keep monitoring our descent because as we come down into denser air, the same power setting will actually produce more thrust, or more torque. So we need to just keep pulling back on the throttle a bit to keep our descent rate up. We're pretty close now to being lined up, so I'm going to engage nav mode. Again, it has gone for a slight wobble, but so what this means is that we're now tracking inbound on this radial, and at some point hopefully we'll get a distance readout from the localizer, and when we're 12 miles from the localizer I'm going to make an 80 degree turn to join the 10 localizer arc, and then I'm going to look for the 18 radial to the VOR to start the turn in. Okay, so for now just concentrate. And if you notice over here, ADF receiver, NDB receiver has picked up the beacon at the airport. We can also use that to guide us around the arc. We don't have any distance readout from the localizer yet. That will have to come. Oh, and another entertaining thing. So let's go back to the charts. We haven't got much time here now. If we go to Stornoway and we go for the actual approach to runway 36. We have to do our own glide slope. This is a localizer, but it's not an ILS. So at 5.5 miles, we need to start descending with 3-degree glide slope. This table here tells us that we're going to be approaching somewhere between 100 and 140, 120, maybe 130. So I'm going to go for a 700 feet, 600 feet descent angle. Let's say 600 because it's easier to drop later, and we don't want to be too low. So I'm going to go 600 feet per minute once we reach 5.5 DME in theory. Right, where are we? Again, we need to pull power back because our descent rate's dropping. We now have a readout over here on the right. I don't know if you can see it, but we have 21 miles to go to the localizer, and we're on the 305 radial to the VOR, so we're all good for the initial approach fix. So what we're looking for is 12 miles when we can start our turn to the left, 80-degree turn to the left to join the arc. Now, we will want heading mode back, so I'm just going to align our heading bug. I'm just going to get the autopilot up ready as well so that we can engage heading mode when we're close, so that we're ready to begin to turn. Now also it's quite cloudy out here, so I'm hoping that we come through the cloud. Actually, will the weather tell us where the clouds are? Indefinite broken. That doesn't sound too good. What are the minimums? Minimums are 330 feet. Oh. Okay, well, sounds low, but let's see. So 17 miles, we've actually leveled off. We've probably descended a bit too quickly, if anything, but for now we'll just reduce our speed down, sort of around about between 180 and 200 as a comfortable speed for the arc. We're 16 miles away from the localizer, so we've got a bit to go yet before we turn at 12. It's going to keep our speed, let's say, just below 200. You can see here we're actually only 10 miles from the Stornoway VOR, but we're 14 from the localizer, which is offset over at the runway. So we've got a couple of miles to go yet before we turn. Heading bug is still centered. When I turn onto the arc, the only thing I'm really going to have, the NDB pointer, which should be at 90 degrees, and I'm going to have the distance, which I'm just going to have to try and keep at 10 miles. I'm just going to throttle back slightly, coming up to 12 now. I'm going to let it drop slightly under 12, because 12 would probably be right if we were doing about 200. As we're doing less than 200, we can probably turn at about 11.5. Or maybe 11.7 or something like that. I'm going to go heading mode now, and then I'm going to turn us about 80 degrees to the left. Not that we're actually going to see anything, but you can see on the artificial horizon that we're turning. Now, the next bearing we want is 18 degrees, so I am going to go and get that lined up. That's going to tell us when to start turning. For now, we have to monitor the distance, so we're coming down 10.6, 10.5, 10.4. We want to keep it about 10. by turning, and okay, now we're on the arc, we will need to turn right, but we don't want to go too far in. We'll just let things settle first. If we can keep a constant 10 miles away, then we're on the arc. And we're slightly inside, so we'll just let it drift out. There's no need to turn yet. Also, this yellow line should approximately be at 90 degrees to us. So this indicates that we're slightly too far in, I think, which is also what the distance is telling me. 9.6. So I'm not going to turn yet because we are still too far inside. And wait for the distance to start increasing. Also going to keep an eye on the... It's critical to start to turn to 358 degrees when this bearing, the 18 degree bearing to the VOR, starts to come in. We're still going in. Interesting. It's a very shallow arc. There we go, 9.5 starting to come back out now. I'll just let it come out to about 9.6, 9.7, then we'll turn right about 5 degrees. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is just reduce the airspeed a bit more. I'm going to pre-prepare by turning the landing lights on, auto feather off, prop sync off, because we're going to get so busy soon. 9.6, I'm just going to turn us about 5 degrees right. As we're now, the distance is now starting to creep up. Keep an eye on this. If anyone sees this bearing pointer move in, please let me know. 9.8, so I'm going to turn another 5 degrees. Just want to keep it around about 10. I think that's starting to come in actually. We don't need to turn too sharply, but once it has come in, I am then I'm gonna start my turn to the right, 358 degrees for the final approach course. Turn now, so let's keep turning. And we're almost at the point where we need to begin our turn. It's just gone through, so I'm going to turn now, heading back to 358 degrees, and I'm going to switch to the localizer, and I'm going to set the localizer course to 358. So what we're looking for now is to intercept the localizer. In fact, I'm going to think so. We have slightly overshot. I'm going to switch to approach mode. I'm going to arm vertical speed mode ready. Okay, now what we're looking at is the distance to, on here we have the distance to the actual localizer. If you remember the glide slope, so let's bring up the glide slope quickly. Glide slope told us we have to start descending at 5.5. So I am now watching this readout. I'm assuming we're horizontally we should be lined up with the runway when this nav bar sinks. 5.5, I'm going to start our descent. Current descent rate is 0. I'm going to use the autopilot to descend at 600 feet per minute until I hope we can see some runway. Getting near 5.5, I'll start just probably about 5.7 because it takes a minute to come down, and I'll also drop the gear, start losing speed. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 600. Drop the gear, drop the throttle back to about 800 on the torque. So we're descending now on what should be an approximation to the glide slope. I'm going to put props full forward. should have checked what our missed approach is. Missed approach is climb to 2,000 feet. Okay, so I'm going to stick this back to 2,000 just as a reminder. So we are descending. I'm going to put one notch of flaps in. Getting quite near the runway now, so fairly concerned that if we don't see it soon, we're probably going to be a bit in a bit of trouble. But slow the plane down. Let's get the final notch of flaps in. It would be good to see something on the ground soon, and we may end up high. And notice, because it's a localizer, we have no, not an ILS, we have no glide slope. We're kind of having to do that ourselves. I mean, we're two miles from the runway now. We should be, what, about 600 feet? Maybe a bit high. We're slightly over 2, so I'm going to keep the speed about 100. I think we're just about to come out of the clouds, in which case I'm going to have to get ready to disconnect the autopilot and potentially make some kind of kamikaze dive, or full power depending on where we are. We may just have to land long. Yeah, that's if we even have a runway. Please have a runway. There's a runway. Okay, we're high. I'm going to power back and increase our descent rate considerably. In fact, this should probably be a go around, but we might be able to salvage it just by reducing the power and then trying to bring our slope back up. Let's get down until we see a red, and then we'll pull back and bring some more power back in. Probably not going to be pretty.
500.
Still pretty high here. Okay, I'm now going to power up a little bit and pull back. It's still high, but probably not too bad now. We're just going to land a little bit long, I think. Just pull the power back a little bit. Not very centre lined either. Not going to be one of my best landings. And I think we're
Come
down.
over to the ramp and park for service.
What on earth was that? Maybe I broke something. Not quite sure where we taxi here. That would have been useful to find out, wasn't it? So let's just do something that you're not meant to do. Stop on the runway. Let me just get the taxi charts up. So we've come in here, and we've probably missed that one, so I think we're going to have to go all the way to the end, unless we cheat. Let's assume we've been cleared to taxi on this runway on the right. So we will vacate the main runway. As we're still on a runway, I am not going to turn the transponder or the landing lights or anything off yet, but I am going to raise the flaps. Sorry, I keep forgetting to remove the browser with this other video recording thing. Now, where are we? Coming to the end of this runway. So we wanna... No, we need to go right to the end actually to get on, because that's a disused section. So to get to the taxiway we need to go right to the end. There we go. Gosh, just realised that my altimeter... Wow, okay, that probably explains why we were so far off with our altitude, because I did not set the altimeter to local QNH, which is 1034. So effectively we were hang on, we were now at minus 530, yeah. So we were too high or too low, I don't know, I'll work that out later. But anyway, that's probably like that one of the worst things you can do. Okay, stress levels are high now, so I'm just going to park in here next to this hangar, as I think we may need some maintenance anyway after that. So yeah, checklist. Before landing checklist should include setting your QNH to local QNH. Definitely. Okay, let's just feather the props. Fuel cut off. We can turn avionics off. Just put the brake on. Just have a quick look on the map, see where we ended up. So this was the VOR that we were initially tracking into from Inverness. This is when we got to 10. Well, this is when we turned on to the 10 DME arc from the localizer, and then this 18-degree bearing here is where we made a right turn to approach. So the only real thing we got completely wrong was the I think was the altimeter setting. I might have been much closer to the runway with the correct altimeter setting. I might just out of interest see if we can do a quick replay of the landing. Back to about here. For amusement's sake, let's have a look from outside. So yeah, we're just coming through the clouds here, massively too high. Yeah, man, we would have been fairly close if we'd had the altimeter set correctly. And this should have been a go around. If this was any kind of normal flight, you would not have just dropped like a stone to try and make the runway. You would have gone around, fixed your altimeter setting, and then had another go. Kind of got away with it, but it's not recommended. Did land a bit late as well as a result. Bit of a bump landing. Actually, let's just see from inside the cockpit. What was our descent rate when we landed? So 500. Coming up about 200, so not great. Oh well, never mind. Next time I will remember to do the altimeter. Okay, that's it for now, and hope you enjoyed the flight, and see you next time. Goodbye.